Chassid Breslav. Chassid Breslav. Chassid Breslav.
A new song from Moshe Storch. How's everybody doing? That's called Chassid Breslav, about people who follow Rabbi Nachman of Breslav. How's everybody doing? A good Shabbos to you and a good Chodesh. Tonight we begin the Hebrew month of Nisan, the month that includes Pesach, Passover, so that'll be in 2 weeks. We shared there's a bracha, a blessing that you can make after Nisan comes in. If you see a flowering fruit tree, it's a special blessing. You can find it on our Facebook page or just Google it. But ideally, you wouldn't do that on Shabbos. So even though Rosh Chodesh begins on Shabbos, if you should see a flowering fruit tree, right, like a pear blossom, an apple blossom, it's gonna be a fruit-bearing tree, but right now it's blossoming with flowers. That's the kind of tree you say a blessing over. But ideally, you don't do it on Shabbos because the sages were concerned that you might come to shake the tree, and thus violate Shabbos by violating the malacha, the prohibited labor of harvesting. How's everybody doing? I'm sorry there was some confusion. We always share a few images from that week's newsletter, I actually selected a different thumbnail of a joke that I told on TikTok because I was afraid of this, but it ended up making it into the collection of photographs for the bulletin. Some people thought that someone died. Nobody died, thank God, nobody died, and we removed that picture. But anyway, you want to get the email bulletin. So if you go to our website, accidentaltalmudist.org, you can sign up for the weekly email, which contains all the best stories from that week. Let's light up the darkness. Who is with us on a Friday afternoon as we're excited, getting ready for Shabbos, getting ready for Rosh Chodesh? This week, we actually need 3 Sefer Torahs, ideally, in synagogue, because we'll be reading Torah portion Tazria, and then normally there's 7 aliyahs from the Parsha. But the 7th this week will be the Rosh Chodesh Torah portion, the little bit of the Torah that we read on every Rosh Chodesh, every first day of a Hebrew month. And then for the Maftir, the additional reading, sort of like an 8th aliyah, it's a special Parsha, Parshas HaChodesh, when we'll go back and read that the passage in Exodus 12, which details the first commandment given to the Jewish people as a people. And that was, this shall be the first of months to you, which is today, right? Or tonight. The first of Nisan, the Torah says this shall be the first of months, and you will celebrate and make a ritual for the beginning of every month. And we read that on this special Shabbos, which is always, in that lead up to Passover. We have this series of special Shabbats where we read about Amalek, and we read about the red heifer, and about Rosh Chodesh, etc. Okay, who is with us on a Friday afternoon? PK in Colorado, Renee in Indiana, Bill in mid-Missouri, Tom in PA, Nancy in North Carolina, right? John in Maine, James in Indianapolis, Yehudit in South Carolina, I think. Allison says, missed you. Paul in the Great Northwest, Carol in Florida, Stephen in New Hampshire, Sandy says, woo! John Boltman in Surfside Beach in South Carolina, Shandora in the Bronx. Where am I? Renee says, Rabbi Nachman Me'uman. Yes, exactly. Are we going to make it to Uman this year for Rosh Hashanah? Uman is in Ukraine. I've been twice. Odds don't look great, but I would never say never about getting to Uman for Rosh Hashanah. Guy in Ohio, Hannah in New York, Pauline in Chicagoland. And over there on the YouTube side, Lynn in North Texas, and Seraphim in California. Welcome, everybody. All right, very interesting daf today. Some colorful laws. We're going to be talking about the rights and responsibilities of the oldest brother, and some more words about conversion and when a convert to Judaism is considered a legitimate convert and when not. And interesting, today we'll see on this daf the source for the idea that when Moshiach comes, right? So when the Messiah comes and God's presence is revealed in the world, then it will be too late to convert to Judaism, right? So, if you go to a rabbi and you're not Jewish and you want to say you want to convert to Judaism, it's a rabbi's job to discourage you, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And then if you still want to do it, then you're going to be welcome, but it's going to be, a lot of work to go through a conversion process and learn everything that you need to learn and to embrace and commit to all the mitzvahs, all the commandments that you're going to be subject to. And that's why the rabbis discourage you. It's not that we don't want people joining the Jewish people. It's for your own benefit, because if you're not Jewish, so you're not obligated in all those hundreds of commandments. And if you don't do them, you haven't done anything wrong. But if you become a Jew and you don't fulfill your obligations as a Jew, then you become accountable for all the mitzvahs that you neglected or the prohibitions that you violated. So it's really for your own good that it's discouraged. But at any rate, if you're thinking, so it's a rabbi's job to discourage you. I'm not a rabbi. So if you're thinking about becoming a Jew, consider it's a very important and difficult and challenging decision that really needs to be thought through very, very carefully. But all I'm saying today is that if you wait until Moshiach comes, then it will be too late. Why would it be too late after the Messiah comes to become a Jew? We'll find out a little bit later today. So we picked this up on 24a. Here in Tractate Yevamos, the 14th volume of the Talmud, and we are discussing Mishna number 5 in chapter 2, which is this kind of odd case about a man who was betrothed to a woman who was one of 2 sisters. They were betrothed, they didn't get married, so they were promised to each other. At that point, they became prohibited to other people. If they were going to break that betrothal, they would need a bill of divorce. But they were only betrothed, and then some time passed, and then when it was time to get married, they weren't sure which of the 2 sisters he betrothed, right? That could happen, and especially in ancient times, when sometimes people of a young age were betrothed to get married later. Now they're not sure which of the sisters he betrothed. It was clear at the time of the betrothal, but it is no longer clear now. And so we're discussing what happens in that situation, particularly if he dies before he gives the bill of divorce or marries the one to whom he was betrothed. Now, no one is sure to whom he was betrothed, and he has 2 brothers. So what are these brothers going to do? They should perform chalitza with the 2 sisters, and then everybody is released. But what if they didn't do that? The Mishna states that if the 2 surviving brothers of this man who betrothed one of 2 sisters, and no one is sure which, the Mishna states that if they married their wives before consulting the court, presumably they performed chalitza and then married them, or maybe they just married them. So the Mishna states that if they married their wives before consulting the court does not remove them from the marriage. And Rav Shela teaches a baraisa that clarifies the Mishnah. And this is the case even if both of the brothers were priests. A woman who performed chalitza is normally forbidden to a priest. Why? Because a chalitza is what? So a man died, he didn't have children. His wife, his widow, comes before his surviving brother for either yibum or chalitza. So until they perform either yibum or chalitza, they have this levirate bond. They're obligated to each other either to perform yibum and get married, and to, so therefore their first child will inherit, adhere to the name of the brother who passed without having a child, or they perform chalitza, which releases them from this obligation. They're free to go off and marry whoever they want. But because they had that bond, and then it was released by performing the ceremony of chalitza, it's like she was married and divorced. She wasn't married and divorced to the Yavam, but it's like that. And so by rabbinic decree, a woman who is a chalutza, a widow who came before the surviving brother, and they perform chalitza, then she becomes a chalutza, and she is prohibited by rabbinic decree to marry a priest, because priests, Cohens, cannot marry a divorced woman by Torah law. So here in this case, this is the case even if both of the brothers were priests. A woman who performed chalitza is normally forbidden to a priest. Yet in this case, although the brother of the other man performed chalitza, they are not required to divorce. And what is the reason for this law? It is as follows. A chalutza is forbidden to a priest by rabbinic law because her status is similar to that of a divorcee who is forbidden to a priest by Torah law. But in a case of uncertainty as to whether she is a chalutza or not, since it may not have been her yavam who performed the ceremony, which would have rendered the chalitza meaningless, the sages did not issue a decree. And this is in keeping with a general principle we've encountered many times, that in matters of Torah law, when there's uncertainty, we rule stringently. When it comes to a rabbinic decree and there is uncertainty, we rule leniently. The Gemara asks, and is the prohibition against a chalutza marrying a priest really by rabbinic law? But isn't it taught in a baraisa, they shall not take a woman that is a harlot or profane, neither shall they take a woman divorced from her husband, for he is holy unto his God. I have derived only a divorcee. From where do I derive that a priest may not marry a chalutza? And the verse states, neither shall they take a woman. The repetition of the word woman extends the halacha to include a chalutza. And the Gemara answers, this prohibition is by rabbinic law. And the verse is mere support. And that concludes Mishnah number 5. Now, we are on Mishnah number 6 here in chapter 2. It is a mitzvah for the eldest to consummate the levirate marriage, to perform yibum, i.e., the eldest brother takes precedence over the other brothers, even though they too are obligated. But if the younger brother consummated the yibum first, he acquires the yevama as his wife. Now, I find this the language of this Mishnah interesting. I would have thought that it would be ideal for the oldest brother to perform the yibum if possible, but the younger brothers can do it. And if one of the younger brothers did it, then he has acquired the yevama as his wife. But it actually says it is a mitzvah, so it's stronger. It's not just that it's ideal, right? In the language with regard to making this bracha over seeing a flowering fruit tree once the month of Nisan has entered, so it says that you shouldn't do it on Shabbos, ideally. But if you did it on Shabbos, it's okay. It's just that it's preferable not to, since you might come to touch the tree and shake it and violate Shabbos in that way. It's not a mitzvah to not do it on Shabbos, right? Ideally, you don't do it on Shabbos. But here they're saying it's a mitzvah for the oldest brother to do it. But if he didn't do it, it still counts if one of the younger brothers did it. That's the Mishnah. And now we'll understand why. The Gemara. The sages taught the following interpretation of the verse. And it shall be that the firstborn that she bears shall be established in the name of his dead brother, and his name will not be blotted out of Israel. That's Deuteronomy 25:6, right? So that states basically why we perform yibum. A man died, he was married but didn't have a child. His brother will step in and marry the widow, and their first child will be an heir to the man who died, so that the one who died, his name should not be blotted out of Israel. Now, where do you hear in that command that it should be the oldest brother, if there are several surviving brothers, who should perform this? I don't hear that in that verse. But, says the Gemara, from here the sages derive that the mitzvah, the commandment, to consummate the levirate marriage is upon the eldest. The next phrase, that she bears, is interpreted to exclude levirate marriage in the case of a widow who is an alonus, who cannot bear children. If she's not capable of bearing children, then yibum doesn't apply. It doesn't override the existing prohibition, do not marry, do not lay with your brother's wife. From the next phrase, shall be established in the name of his dead brother, it is derived that the same brother who performs the mitzvah of yibum is established in his brother's name with regard to inheritance, i.e., he inherits his brother's property. But aren't we saying that the whole point of this is that the boy who's born from this union, or girl, if there's only one, or this first child, is going to be the heir of the brother who died? Now we're hearing, first of all, it's a commandment that they read into this verse. It's a commandment that the oldest brother perform yibum, and that oldest brother is going to inherit the dead brother's property. Now, the second inference that the sages read into this is actually not that surprising because, well, this child is not ready to inherit. Right? It's a baby. You can't just give all this property to a baby. You're going to need, some kind of a trustee award anyway. So it makes sense that the brother who stepped in is going to inherit the property of the one who died, so that when he dies, it's going to pass through to his oldest child of this union with this woman, right? So this will be the heir of that property. It makes sense, right? But how the sages read into it that the oldest brother needs to do it, they don't even explain it. It's just, it shall be that the firstborn that she bears shall be established in the name of his dead brother. It sounds like it's the firstborn of the union of the Yevam and the Yevama. But because it starts with, and it shall be that the firstborn, right? And so they're saying it shall be that the firstborn shall do it, and their firstborn will establish the name of the one who died. Now, the Baraisa continues and asks, do you say that he succeeds in the name of his brother for inheritance? Or perhaps it is only to inherit his name, literally. If, for example, the deceased brother was named Yosef, they must call the son born from the yibum Yosef. Or if his name was Yochanan, that they must call him Yochanan. Now, I will say that as a practical matter, they probably will generally do that, right? The poor man died. His brother stepped in and performed yibum, and now they have a child, and it's a male. They probably will name it after the brother who died because it's traditional to keep names in a family. Jews, at least Ashkenazic Jews, don't name babies after living relatives, but very often will name after a relative who recently died. So it certainly makes sense that they would do this. Now the Baraisa answers, it is stated here, he shall succeed in the name of his brother, and it is stated there, Genesis 48:6, they shall be called after the name of their brothers in their inheritance. Just as the word name stated here in Genesis is referring explicitly to inheritance, so too the word name stated here in Leviticus means with regard to inheritance. The Torah is not commanding that you name, that it's a mitzvah to name this baby after its uncle that died, and who he's going to become the heir of, as it were. The Torah is not commanding you name it after the brother who died. It is commanding that he will inherit the brother who died. The Baraisa continues to expound the next phrase of the verse, and his name will not be blotted out of Israel. Deuteronomy 25:6. This excludes the case where the deceased was a eunuch, as his name is already blotted out, since it is impossible for him to have children. Interesting that we haven't said that yet, that if the brother who died was castrated and he was incapable of having children already at the time before he died, then yibum does not apply. And the Baraisa continues to expound the next phrase. And Rava said, even though in the entire Torah a verse does not depart from its literal meaning, and even if the sages offer a homiletical interpretation of the verses, and so they can learn out additional laws, right, by studying the verses and the exact wording of particular Torah verses, nevertheless, the literal meaning of the commandments in the Torah are never going to depart we're not going to. We might find additional laws that the sages will sometimes even call Torah laws, even though they weren't explicit in the text as written. But they're never going to say that the law as written is out, right? They're not going to remove the literal meaning of a Torah verse, except here. Here, the verbal analogy teaching that the word name is referring to inheritance comes to remove the verse from its literal meaning altogether. Like, it sounds like you have to name that baby born from yibum after the brother who died. And here they're saying, no, that's not the commandment. Even though it sounds like that's the commandment, what the commandment really means is that he will inherit the brother who died. And the Gemara asks, were it not for the verbal analogy, would I have said that the meaning of the word name is the actual name? The verse would be incomprehensible according to its literal meaning. Whom is the merciful one instructing in this verse? To whom does the possessive pronoun in the phrase his brother apply? If God is speaking to the Yavam, the surviving brother, he should have said, shall succeed in the name of your dead brother. And if the verse is instructing the rabbinic court about the law in general, it should have said, shall succeed in the name of his father's brother. But now that it says, it shall be that the firstborn that she bears shall be established in the name of his dead brother, and his name will not be blotted out of Israel. So the Gemara rejects this question. Rejects the question altogether. And perhaps this is what the merciful one is saying to the court. Say to the Yavam that the child born to him shall be established in the name of his brother. Were it not for the verbal analogy, the verse could have been understood according to its literal meaning. Name him after your dead brother. Rather, the verbal analogy comes to remove it from its literal meaning altogether. Your first child will be the heir of your brother who died. The Gemara challenges the Baraisa. Now that you say that the verse, and it shall be that the firstborn she bears, is written in reference to the eldest brother, that the eldest brother needs to come and perform this yibum, say that the firstborn brother consummates the yibum, but that an ordinary brother, i.e. not the firstborn, may not consummate the yibum. And that if the firstborn son is unable to enter into yibum, or is no longer alive, that's it. No one else can perform the mitzvah goes away, right? If the man who died didn't have a brother, so there's no yibum. We don't find some other guy to come in and perform yibum. Now that you said it's a mitzvah, a commandment, that the oldest surviving brother, or that the oldest brother, period, the firstborn, performs yibum, well, what if the firstborn also died? Right? Or maybe even if the firstborn was a woman. So maybe in that situation, there is no yibum. Now that you said it has to be the oldest brother, right? If he's unable to do it, maybe there's no yibum at all. Why are you going to say that it's a commandment for the oldest brother to do it, but if he can't do it, one of the other brothers does it? Or if one of the other brothers does it anyway, it's still a valid mitzvah. Why hold that way? Maybe this is a commandment on the oldest brother, and if the oldest brother doesn't do it, nobody does it. Gemara answers, if so, that the mitzvah of levirate marriage applies only to the firstborn, then, in the case of a wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist, we've already seen that if there's a brother born late who was born after the brother who died and left a widow, right? He was born after that brother died. Yibum does not apply to him. We've already seen that a bunch of times. A brother with whom one did not coexist is not obligated in yibum. Since we know that he might be obligated in yibum if he's just young, but he was born in the lifetime of the one who died, it must be that the obligation of yibum does not only fall on the firstborn. We know it falls on other brothers. So if so, that the mitzvah of yibum applies only to the firstborn, then in the case of a wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist, which the merciful one excluded by the verse, if brothers dwell together, as we learned a few weeks ago, why do I need such an exclusion? If only the firstborn is obligated to perform yibum, then there's no need to separately exclude the case of a wife of one's brother with whom one did not coexist, because by definition, one in that position cannot be the firstborn. That's how we know that it might be it might obligate the firstborn above the others, but the others are still obligated if the firstborn doesn't do it. Rav Acha refutes the Gemara's answer, but say that the verse comes to exclude the case of a brother with whom one did not coexist when one is nevertheless the firstborn of the mother. For example, if the father had 2 wives. So it might be that this young brother who didn't coexist with his brother that died was the firstborn of his own mother, because they were only paternal half-brothers. But the Gemara rejects this. You cannot say that, as the merciful one made yibum dependent upon inheritance. And inheritance comes from the father and not from the mother. We're talking about the firstborn of the father. The Gemara again challenges the Baraisa. Then say that when there is a firstborn, the mitzvah of yibum can be fulfilled by any of the brothers. But that when there is no firstborn, for example, if he had already died, then the mitzvah of yibum may not be fulfilled by any of the younger brothers. Perhaps that's the way that we should read it. If there's a firstborn around who can perform yibum, he should do it. If he doesn't do it, one of the younger brothers does it. But if the firstborn already died, maybe there's no yibum for anybody. And the Gemara answers, the verse states in Deuteronomy 25:5, and one of them dies, without specifying which brother dies. Are we not dealing even with the case where the firstborn died, and yet the merciful one states that the younger brother should perform yibum? And the Gemara refutes this answer. Say that the case in the Torah is referring to when the younger brother died, and only then the merciful one states that the firstborn must consummate the levirate marriage. The Gemara answers, didn't the merciful one explicitly exclude the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist, which can apply only to a brother who was not the firstborn? The Gemara challenges the law. Say that when there is no firstborn brother, if a younger brother went ahead and consummated yibum, then he acquires his Yevama as a wife. But if there is a firstborn and the younger brother went ahead and performed yibum first, then he does not acquire the Yevama as a wife, because the Torah specifies that the firstborn brother must perform the mitzvah. And the Gemara rejects this. The verse states, if brothers dwell together, implying that the brothers' dwellings were equated one with the other, and all the brothers are equally obligated in the mitzvah. So we're back to the law as we understand it, and which is the law. The oldest brother is obligated, but if one of the other brothers perform yibum, he has acquired the Yevama as his wife. The Gemara challenges the law again. So say, when there is a firstborn, let the mitzvah return to the eldest brother if the other brothers refuse to perform yibum. But when there is no firstborn, the court does not return to the eldest, as the mitzvah primarily applies specifically to the firstborn. And if there is no firstborn, none of the brothers takes precedence. Why did Abaye the elder teach it is a mitzvah for the eldest of the brothers to consummate the yibum? If the eldest did not wish to do so, then the court goes to his younger brother. And if he also did not wish to do so, the court returns again to the eldest. And this implies that the eldest, even if he is not the firstborn, has a greater mitzvah than the younger brother. So even if the firstborn died, then we go to the oldest surviving brother. It is a bigger mitzvah for him to perform yibum than any of the other brothers. The Gemara answers, since it is derived that the eldest brother takes precedence from the verse about the firstborn, then just as with regard to the firstborn, his status as firstborn causes him to take precedence, so too with regard to the eldest surviving brother, his status as the eldest causes him to take precedence. And the Gemara challenges the law again. So say that if the firstborn consummates the yibum, he receives his deceased brother's inheritance. But if an ordinary brother consummates the yibum, he does not receive the inheritance. After all, we know that the oldest brother has a double portion in the inheritance from their father. So maybe, since this duty, this obligation, yibum, falls on the oldest brother, and that he inherits the brother who died, his belongings. So maybe it's if the oldest brother performs yibum, okay, he inherits the property of the brother that died. But if it's not the oldest who performs yibum, maybe he doesn't inherit. And the Gemara is going to disprove that. The Gemara answers that the verse states, the firstborn that she bears shall be established in the name of his dead brother. And if the younger brother performs levirate marriage, he has established his brother's name and thereby earns the inheritance, right? The one who steps in and performs yibum inherits the dead brother's property. Why? Because this is the brother who performed yibum and not another. The Gemara asks, but if there is no difference between the firstborn and the eldest, why does the merciful one call the brother who enters yibum the firstborn? With regard to what law was that word written in the Torah? This is in order to limit the inheritance, just as a firstborn does not take in inheritance property that is due as he does property that is possessed, but instead receives a double inheritance only from the property that is in the actual possession of their father. So too, this one who enters yibum, whether firstborn or younger, does not take in inheritance property that is due to the estate of the brother who died, but only the property that is in the possession of that estate. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 6. We're on 24b, and now we go to Mishnah number 7 here in chapter 2. One suspected by others of engaging in sexual relations with a Canaanite maidservant, and she was later set free, or one suspected of relations with a Gentile woman, and she subsequently converted, may not marry that woman, since this will strengthen the suspicions against him. But if he did marry her, the judges of the court do not remove her from him, i.e. they do not require him to divorce her. Before I read the second half of the Mishnah, why are we talking about somebody who had relations with a Gentile woman, and then she converted, and then he married her? What does this have to do with yibum, right? And the answer is because in the previous 2 Mishnahs ago, we were talking about what causes a man to be considered one who died childless, and what causes his brother to be considered his brother in order to perform yibum, that he'll be obligated to perform yibum. Right? So even if he has a child who's a mamzer, or the brother is a mamzer, he's obligated in yibum. But if he's the child, but if the man who died had a child with a non-Jewish woman, then that's not considered his child, and his brother would be obligated in yibum with the widow. Having introduced that subject in the Mishnah, now we're getting a Mishnah just on this subject of marriages that are allowed to be consummated and to remain marriages, and marriages that a court would step in and break up, and why they would do that. It's really off topic for the subject of yibum, but it does follow from the flow of the Mishnahs that we've had. Right, so one suspected by others of engaging in sexual relations with a Canaanite maidservant, and she was later set free, or one suspected of relations with a Gentile woman, a Jewish man suspected of relations with a Gentile woman, and she subsequently converted, he may not marry that woman, since this will strengthen the suspicions that he had relations with her, when they were not married and she was not Jewish. But if he did marry her, they, the judges of the court, do not remove her from him, i.e. they do not require him to divorce her. Now, with regard to one who is suspected of illicit relations with a married woman, and they, the judges of the court, removed her from her husband, i.e. required them to divorce they require this woman who cheated on her husband to divorce her husband, right? It was proven that she cheated on him. Then it's going to be prohibited for her to marry the man with whom she had an affair, right? The judges of the court removed her from her husband, i.e. required them to divorce due to this. Even if the man suspected of the illicit relation subsequently married her, he must divorce her. You cannot have an affair with a married woman, and God forbid have children, because they would be mamzers, and then she divorces her husband, and then you marry her. That's prohibited, right? That's prohibited. If you feel your heart is straying from your wife, work it out with your wife. If that marriage can't last, then you have a divorce. Only then can you go, look for your next wife. And, according to Jewish law, obviously you don't have sex until you get married again to your next wife. Okay, that's Mishnah number 7. Gemara. The Mishnah teaches that one who is suspected of relations with a Gentile woman, who later converted may never marry her. This implies that she is, however, a convert, although it appears that she converted only in order that he might marry her. And the Gemara raises a contradiction from a Baraisa. Both a man who converted for the sake of a woman and a woman who converted for the sake of a man, and similarly, one who converted for the sake of the king's table, so that he could serve in a prestigious capacity, or for the sake of Solomon's servants, who were also considered prestigious. In all of these cases, they are not converts, and this is the statement of Rabbi Nehemiah. All right, so let's just read where the law ends up on this subject, because we may have heard of cases where someone didn't convert to Judaism because they were so drawn to become a Jew, but perhaps they converted to Judaism just to marry a Jew who that person and their family, wouldn't accept the new spouse unless it was a Jew. The problem with such a conversion is that it's not motivated by the desire to become a Jew and be obligated in Jewish commandments and Torah, etc., to become a Torah Jew. Rather, they really only did it in order to get married, so their heart is not in it. In such a case, is the conversion real? Now, what is the law? The court, this is the law, okay? This is according to Shulchan Aruch, right? So this is how the law eventually became codified at the end of this discussion and other discussions in the Talmud. The court must examine the motivation of a potential convert to ensure that he wishes to convert solely for the sake of heaven. If the court did not examine his motivation before converting him, and even if it subsequently became known that he converted for some ulterior motive, like to marry a particular Jew or to receive the prestigious position or the entitlements of a Jew. For example, somebody who converted at the time that the Jewish king was mighty in the world, like in King Solomon's time. Solomon had such a vast influence in the world that some people converted just to be part of King Solomon's court. They didn't really care about becoming a Torah Jew. They just wanted to adhere to the power structure of King Solomon. Likewise, in the Purim story, it says at the end of the Megillah, at the end of the book of Esther, that once Haman was defeated and Esther was the queen of the biggest empire the world had ever known, and Mordechai was like the grand vizier, the number 2 guy, but really wielding tremendous authority throughout the Persian Empire, that many other people converted to Judaism. Were they sincere, authentic converts, or did they just feel like the star is rising of the Jews, their power is great, I'll just join them now? So they weren't converting for the right reason. So, says Shulchan Aruch, if the court did not examine his motivation before converting him, and even if it subsequently became known that he converted for some ulterior motive, since he has been circumcised and immersed in a ritual bath, the mikvah, which all converts immerse in, before a court of 3 rabbis, 3 judges, he no longer has the status of a Gentile, but his status remains in doubt until it becomes clear that he accepted Judaism completely. Very interesting. So the motivation might be suspect. Maybe they didn't convert with a wholehearted intention to become a Torah mitzvahs Jew. So then they're in this uncertain status. He is no longer a Gentile. He is a Jew, but he doesn't have a complete Jewish status. He might be an apostate Jew. And so the court would observe this person for a period of time and see how he conducts himself. Does he start living as a Jew and undertake the obligations of a Jew? If so, okay, so then the conversion was sincere. But if he doesn't, if he just went through a conversion ritual but continues to live the same life that he led before, okay, so then that person is not a Gentile anymore. He is an apostate Jew, he's like a heretic Jew. Right, so he's a Jew who has rejected Judaism, but he's a Jew who has rejected Judaism. It's very interesting. So he no longer has the status of a Gentile, but his status remains in doubt until it becomes clear that he accepted Judaism completely. He does not have the status of a Jew such that he should be trusted For example, in declaring food to be permitted. You don't listen to him when he says, yeah, don't worry, this food is kosher, you can eat it. We don't trust him because his status is uncertain. But nevertheless, he is not considered a Gentile. And if he marries a Jewish woman, the marriage is valid, which it would not be if she married a Gentile. Even if he reverted to idol worship, he is considered an apostate Jew based on the opinion of Rav and the conclusion of the Gemara's discussion. All right, now we go back. As Rabbi Nehemiah would say, with regard to converts by lions, i.e. the forced converts such as the Samaritans who were moved into the northern kingdom of Israel after the Assyrian conquest, when Jews were removed, that's the 10 lost tribes of Israel, and they needed to settle the land, so they were replaced by these Samaritans. And the Samaritans found that living in the land, in the Holy Land, and being an idol worshiper was dangerous, and they were being attacked by lions. And so they converted, but it was a conversion under duress. And that's why the Samaritans, or Kutim in Hebrew, always had this uncertain status. Are they really Jews or not? Because they didn't convert out of a desire to become Torah Jews. They converted just to save their lives from lions. That's what is being discussed when we hear the phrase converts by lions. And the converts who convert based on their dreams, and converts of the time of Mordechai and Esther, described in the verse, and many from among the peoples of the land became Jews, for the fear of the Jews was fallen upon them. Esther 8:17. All of these are not converts until they are converted at this present time. Now the Gemara clarifies the meaning of the words. Could it enter your mind to say only at this present time when Rabbi Nehemiah is speaking? Since he mentioned the converts of Mordechai and Esther, who were deceased long before Rabbi Nehemiah made this statement, he therefore cannot possibly mean this phrase literally. Rather, say, like at this present time, when the Jewish people are in exile and there is no material benefit to conversion, right? So, it's tough to be a Jew. Jews are persecuted, right? In every generation, they rise up to destroy us. And the only reason we're still here is because the Holy One saves us from their midst. But nevertheless, it's not easy to be a Jew. So you would think that anyone who converts to Judaism, even if it's like to get married, it's not easy to be a Jew. You're really undertaking a lot when you become a Jew. No material advantage, so it must be for the sake of heaven. But this converting for marriage definitely is suspect, and that's why rabbinic court would observe that person after the conversion ritual. But if no marriage is involved, then it must be a wholehearted conversion, because what advantage do you get in this world from becoming a Jew? At least in terms of safety and power and politics, it's very difficult to be a Jew. At least that's what they're saying 1,500 years ago. When there was no state of Israel, for example. Okay, so, and now there are people, and this is happening all the time, who are, African refugees who make their way to Israel. Not, because they're Ethiopians or Nigerians who have been practicing Judaism in their countries or in Uganda, but just others, who had no connection to Judaism before, but they fled, a war-torn region and made it to Israel. Now, those folks might want to become Jewish so that they can get a citizenship status and a residency. That would be, this kind of questionable conversion for sure. And this question is going to come up again. There are a lot of Ukrainians who are making their way to Israel. Many of them are Jewish for sure. Some of them, are they Jewish? Are they not? What kind of Jewish status do they have? They're going to end up coming before rabbinic courts if they convert to Judaism, and these kinds of questions will need to be addressed. So, returning to the question above, how could a woman who converted for the sake of a man be considered a true convert? And the Gemara answers, but wasn't it stated with regard to that Baraisa that Rav Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta said in the name of Rav, the law is in accordance with the statement of the one who says they are all converts. And the Gemara asks, if so, Why is one suspected of relations with such a woman not permitted to enter into marriage with her ab initio as well? And the Gemara answers, the reason for the prohibition is due to the following statement of Rav Asi. Rav Asi said, with regard to such cases, put away from yourself a twisted mouth and perverse lips put far from you. Proverbs 4:24. If they were to marry, they would give substance to the prior suspicions that they were having sex before they were married, before she converted, and that now she's converting just so that they can, settle down and get married. So that's, a suspicious conversion in terms of accepting Torah mitzvahs because your heart is, attached to God and you really want to become a Jew for the sake of heaven. By the way, we often hear it discussed, that when people really come to Judaism because they want to become a Jew, they feel this longing to become a Torah Jew. It's like that's a Jewish soul that somehow, got lost in the nations and is coming home. It's a very beautiful description of that process. The sages taught converts are not accepted in the days of the Moshiach. Right? Once the Messiah comes, converts will not be accepted. Similarly, they did not accept converts in the days of King David or in the days of King Solomon. And Rabbi Eliezer said, what is the verse that hints at this law? Behold, Isaiah 54:15, behold, they may gather together, Gor Yagur, but without me. Whosoever shall gather together, Gar, with you shall fall on yours. And the word Gor implies that only a convert, Ger, who becomes part of the Jewish people when the Jews are living in exile, at a time when God is not clearly revealed, i.e. without me, are considered part of the Jewish people. But another who wishes to convert in a time when God is clearly revealed shall not be accepted. Once Moshiach comes, it will be too late to become a Jew, to convert to Judaism. And the source for that is right here on Yevamos 24b. And indeed, what is the halacha? The court did not accept converts in the eras of David and Solomon as they feared that Gentiles might convert due to the strength and glory of the Jewish kingdom. And once Mashiach comes, that same idea to the nth degree. The Mishna states that one who is suspected of relations with a married woman may not marry her even after she divorces her husband. Even if they marry without permission, they must divorce. Rav said this is only in a case where there were witnesses to her infidelity, and because of their testimony, the court required her first husband to divorce her. However, if her first husband divorced her due to suspicion and rumors, but without witnesses to the infidelity, then her second husband would not be obligated to divorce her. Rav Sheshes said, I say that when Rav was dozing or sleeping, he said that law, and it is mistaken, as it is taught in a baraisa with regard to one who was suspected of adultery with a married woman, and as a result, the court required her husband to divorce her, and later she married someone else, and was then divorced by the second husband. If the one who had been suspected of illicit relations with her then married her, he need not divorce her. Wait, now I'm confused. I'm going to read that again. As it is taught in a baraisa, with regard to one who was suspected of adultery with a married woman, and as a result, the court requires her husband to divorce her. And later she married someone else, third guy, and was then divorced by this second guy, by this third guy, right? So she's married to one guy, she has an affair, she's married to Jim, she has an affair with Tom, and then she divorces Jim and marries, Bruce, and then divorces Bruce. So if then she marries the guy with whom she had the original affair, he need not divorce her. Okay? So the Gemara clarifies this. What are the circumstances of this case? It is referring to a case where there are witnesses to their adultery, when another came and put an end to the rumor of her misconduct by marrying her. What of it? If there were witnesses, the adulterers may never marry each other. Rather, is it not referring to a case where there were no witnesses to the adultery? And the reason she does not have to be divorced from her third husband, with whom she committed adultery while married to her first husband, is specifically because another came and by marrying her, put an end to the rumor, her second husband. And this implies that were it not so, i.e., had she not married someone else before marrying the man suspected of committing adultery with her during her first marriage, the court would have removed her from him and required them to divorce, even without witnesses to their adultery. And this contradicts Rav's statement above that they must divorce only if there were witnesses to the infidelity. I mean, soap opera's got nothing on this page, right? The Gemara responds, Rav could have said to you that the same is true even if another did not come and put an end to the rumor by marrying her. And the same principle applies. If there were witnesses to the adultery, the court removes her and requires them to divorce. But if there were no witnesses, the court does not remove her. And this is what the Baraisa is saying. The novelty in this Baraisa is that even though another came and put an end to the rumor by marrying her, nevertheless, the suspected adulterer may not marry her ab initio due to the original suspicions. The Gemara raises an objection from a different Baraisa that qualifies the previous one. In what case is this statement that the court removes her from the suspected adulterer said? It is when she has no children from her first husband. But if she has children from him, she is not required to be divorced from the suspected adulterer. On the contrary, if they were required to divorce, it could strengthen the original rumor, and others might suspect that her children are mamzers. However, if witnesses to her impurity, meaning her adultery, came and testified that she had relations with this man while she was married to her first husband, then even if she has several children from the first husband, she is required to be divorced. And this implies that a woman without children from her first husband must separate from a man suspected of illicit relations with her on the strength of suspicion alone. Do we force this couple to divorce because she's suspected of adultery in the absence of witnesses? They're bringing a couple of arguments in favor of that, but they're really resisting. Now, where does the law end up on this? What is the halacha? If one was suspected of committing adultery with a married woman, and due to this, her husband divorced her, and she married someone else and was later divorced from him, it is nevertheless prohibited for her to marry the suspected adulterer that happened to the affair during her first marriage. However, if she transgressed and married this man, he need not divorce her, even if she had no children. And the ruling applies even if there were witnesses to circumstantial evidence, provided they were not witnesses to the adultery itself. If they saw the act in flagrante, then we make them divorce. In which case, the adulterer would be forced to divorce the adulteress if there were witnesses to the actual act of adultery. Right? Okay. So the Gemara raises an objection from a different Baraisa that qualifies the previous one. We read that. The Gemara answers and explains that Rav establishes the Mishna as referring only to a case where she has children by her first husband and there are witnesses to her adultery. In such a situation, she and the adulterer must divorce. But without witnesses, they are not required to divorce. And the Gemara asks, what forced Rav to establish the Mishnah as referring to a case where she has children and there are witnesses, and explain that the reason that the court removes her from the suspected adulterer, right, and the court forces her to divorce the man with whom she had the adulterous relationship, is because there were witnesses. But that if there were no witnesses, they do not remove her. Why does he not establish the Mishnah as referring to a case where there were no children and that they must divorce even if there were no witnesses? And Rav has said the language of the Mishnah was difficult for Rav. Due to that, he deemed it necessary to interpret as he did. Why does the Tana specifically teach they remove her from him, hotziucha? Let it teach he divorces her, hotzia, in the singular. Rather, every time the plural form, they remove her, is used, it is referring to the judges of the court. And a court removes a woman from her suspected adulterer only if there were witnesses, and not due to suspicion alone. I think that seems, clear and logical. If you wish, say a different answer for Rav's explanation. It's getting late. I think we're going to just stop there. Okay. Pick that up on Saturday night. And let's have a little bit of time for questions here. On Yevamos 24. 4. Bill. All right, that raises a question. Let us say a man gets into a tragic accident and is hospitalized, and in the course of the accident, he was castrated. Ultimately, he dies of his wounds. Does that mean that yibum doesn't apply because there was a period of time while he was alive but dying and a eunuch? Great question. You've really become a Talmudist, Bill. It seems to me, I'd have to look it up, I'm not sure. My guess is that this doesn't count as a eunuch. I think we might have even seen this somewhere. Because definitely the sages are going to make a distinction between somebody who was castrated intentionally and somebody for whom it was an accident, right? So somebody who was castrated intentionally, that violates a Torah commandment, right? We've actually seen that before. A Jew is not allowed to castrate an animal. Like, you're actually not allowed to castrate your dog. There's ways to get around that you sort of like lend the dog to your Gentile neighbor who hasn't castrated, seemingly without your knowledge, and then you get the dog back. Okay, whatever. But there's definitely a commandment in the Torah not to castrate an animal, and certainly not a human. You can't do that. So if it was done intentionally, then yibum would not apply. Accidentally, it seems not. And then I bet you're already anticipating this question, Bill. Well, what if it was done intentionally but not by him? Like, it was done against his will. It wasn't an accident in a car accident, but some evil psychopath came along and castrated this man. So somebody did it on purpose, but it was not his intention. Does yibum apply? I don't know. Tom, does firstborn in this case refer to the oldest surviving son, or to when it is a middleborn died and the firstborn must perform Yevamos? So we saw that they addressed that specific question, and so the mitzvah falls on the eldest surviving brother, but if one of the other brothers perform yibum, then the Yevama becomes his wife. Right? If nobody's going to perform yibum, it's going to be chalitza anyway. They would really prefer that the eldest perform chalitza, but if one of the other brothers perform chalitza, she is free to go her way and marry whoever she wants in the same way. And finally, Sharon, couldn't it be said that Sarah became a Jew because of her marriage to Abraham? I mean, it could be said, but the Torah is silent on that matter. Right? We know that Sarah was a prophetess, right? God spoke to Sarah also. She was operating at such a high level of holiness and righteousness. We don't know what exactly was her relationship, to this fledgling religion, as it were. And definitely, if you use the test that the sages describe here of, well, we're uncertain about a conversion for the sake of marriage, so we observe that person and how they behave. And Sarah certainly conducted herself as a Jew for many, many, many years after, she teamed up with Abraham. So her, Judaism is, guaranteed, as it were. Okay, that's what I've got for us today. We covered a lot of interesting ground, didn't we? It's great to be learning with you. Wishing you all a good Shabbos and a good Chodesh. We begin the Hebrew month of Nisan tonight, so there'll be special davening on this Shabbos for Rosh Chodesh as well as Shabbos. And we're in the month of redemption, the month of our freedom. Sometimes also called the month of miracles, even though Kislev, which has Hanukkah in it, also called the month of miracles. But there were more miracles in Nisan, right? All the plagues and the splitting of the sea and the splitting of the sea. I mean, but especially, God's hand reaching out and pulling all of our people out of slavery in Egypt is the biggest revealed miracle of all time, except for the revelation of God's own presence at Mount Sinai. That's a little later. That'll be in Sivan. But at any rate, we're entering Nisan, and the 2-week counter to Passover begins tonight. Have a great Shabbos and Rosh Chodesh.